Hi, we are on 26 November 2021 on St. Joseph, Minnesota, and we are with James Kuebelbeck. Hello, James. Thank you.
Yes, hello.
Thank you for accepting my visit from Europe. And we are here to talk about many interesting things. The first thing I want to ask you, James, is what is a dowser?
Well, basically, a dowser is a person who can somehow locate things or find things, kind of unexplainable human faculty. And how I got started in doing this, or become interested in it, when I was a young boy, I grew up on a dairy farm, and most of the rural farms at the time had dug wells. They would just dig down into the ground 3 or 4 foot diameter and dig down until they got to some water formation, and that's where most of the rural wells were used on farms at that time. And we had dairy cattle at the time, and my dad wanted to expand the dairy herd, and so he thought we had a small dug well, and he thought we'd have to, if we wanted to expand our dairy herd, we had to have more of a water supply. So he decided to have a new well dug. And a lot of times people in the area, they would dig down sometimes 20, 30, 40 feet and wouldn't find any water at all. So the next summer they'd hire somebody, or they'd start digging, and they'd dig in another place and maybe end up with the same result. And the story at the time was that they should get, we lived in a Catholic area, and there was an abbey not too far from us, and there was an older Catholic priest that they would have him come out, and he supposedly was able to tell them where they might find a water supply. So he would come out there, and he would sometimes tell the people, "Oh, no, you have to dig between these 2 dry holes and you'll find water." And the story was that, yes, they would do that, and they would find a good water well right between 2 of the dry holes, and sometimes even at a shallower depth than the previously dug dry holes. And I'm this young kid at the time, and I'm thinking, yeah, right, we live in a Catholic community, nobody wants to badmouth the priest, so they kind of embellish these stories. But problem was, he would do this time after time after time in neighboring farms, and at some point it appeared that this went far beyond the laws of chance and average. So there must be something to this. But anyway, my dad decided to have this well dug, and the only person he could find was some kind of a local person who he was a good worker. He dug wells for a living, and he would stick to the job until it was finished. But he also had a reputation for spending every evening in the local saloon, and sometimes he would come to these places, and he would be pretty sleepy in the morning. But at any rate, my dad thought, well, we have to hire him, because he's been very successful in doing this. So my dad went to town, and he got all the stuff collected around to drill a new well, and they had big concrete rings and stuff that they could place down in the ground as they dug. And when it got too deep, well, then they had to haul up the dirt that he was digging, haul it up with buckets and dump it alongside the well. But anyway, the day they were going to start the well, the man came out, and my dad had all the stuff around the area that we needed for the new well, and he came out and he started to talk about the weather, the news, what was going on in the neighborhood, anything he could think of, and I knew my dad was paying him by the hour. And one of the stipulations the man had was that he be paid at the end of every working day. And I imagine so he could spend the money in the local saloon at night. But anyway, I could see my dad getting kind of impatient there, and like, let's get started. And the guy just kept talking about everything else, and finally my dad said, well, he said, I think we better get started here. And I had asked the guy when he came, I said, are we going to get one of those water finders to know where to dig? And he says, no, he says, your dad wants to dig it here pretty close to the barn, that's where we're going to dig. And I said, well, what about that old Father Elmer? I said, our neighbors say that he can find water where nobody else could. And he said, well, he said, I gotta say he's the luckiest guy there is, because he says he seems to be able to do that, but he said, I talked to your dad and he says he wanted nothing to do with him. And I asked my dad, I said, in fact it was the day before, I think, I said, are we gonna get that Father Elmer out here to know where to dig? And he said, yeah, when pigs fly. And I said, what does that mean? He said, it means we're not going to do it. And he said, I think those are just stories they tell about him. Anyway, so here we are. I'm standing around, this young kid and my dad and this so-called well digger was there. And finally my dad said, well, I think we better get started here. And about that time, a car comes driving in the driveway. And I forget what the guy's name was who was doing the digging. But anyway, he said, oh, he says, that looks like old Martin's car. My dad says, come in the driveway and, he says, and that looks like he's got Father Elmer in the car with him. Boy, my dad looked at Ben was the guy's name. He looked at Ben and he says, and how did he find out? He says, we're going to dig a well here today. Ben says, oh, sometimes word gets around. And I'm sure it got around at a saloon at night. But anyway, so what could my dad say? Father Elmer, he gets out of the car and he says to my dad, he says, well, Max, what do you plan to do here? And I'm this little kid, and I thought, well, it's pretty obvious what we plan to do here, you know? And Dad says, well, it kind of looks like we're going to dig a well, doesn't it? Yeah, he says, but he says, hey, before you dig that, he said, can I just walk around here just a little bit first? And my dad says, what could he say? Yeah, go ahead. So Father Elmer, he went back to the car and he got out this kind of a Y-shaped willow branch, and I thought, gee, if it'd be any bigger, I could have made a slingshot out of that thing. But anyway, this Father Elmer, he walks around where my dad had the plan to dig, and he walked a little further, and all of a sudden it looked like the front end of that willow branch just dipped toward the ground like a magnet. And that was kind of interesting, I thought. So, all right, he walks around a little more, and every time he came past that certain spot, he said, that thing just bent toward the ground. And he told my dad, he says, no, Max, he says, I think you should dig it over there. And it was even closer to the barn. And that would be easier because you could get the water into the barn easier later. And my dad says, oh, you think so? And he says, yeah, he says, I think so. Well, my dad, he wanted no part of this. And he said, well, Father, he said, if you can tell me there's water there and there's no water here, he says, maybe you can tell me how deep it is too then. Well, Father Elmer looked at him and he said, Max, he says, well, how much, what do you, oh yeah, he said, let me see what I can do. And he went back over that spot and he had that willow branch there, and geez, he's moving his arms up and down, and finally he said, Max, I think if you dig down here about 23 feet, you'll have a good water supply. And my dad says, yeah, right. He says, all the neighbors around here, they're at least 35, 40 feet deep. And you think this is less than that? And he said, well, Max, he says, you're not going to know until you dig it, I guess. Well, my dad, he wasn't going to give Ben any more stories to tell at the saloon that night. So he said, well, Father, he said, if you can tell me there's water there and you can tell me how deep it is, maybe you can tell me how many rocks we're going to run to on the way down. Father Elmer looked at my dad and wet his finger, and he put his hand down in the sand, and a couple grains of sand on there. He says, now, Max, he says, these are rocks. Now, what do you expect from an old priest? Well, my dad, well, I guess he wasn't going to fool this old priest after all. And my dad says, no, I mean rocks like this. And Ben, he was smiling pretty broadly about that time, and my dad looked over at Ben and thought, oh, what the heck, he can't get out of this situation. So he says, okay, Father, he says, we'll dig where you say. And then the priest said, well, he says, okay. And Dad said, well, thanks for coming out. And he didn't mean it. But so Father Elmer and the driver, they left the driveway, and my dad was mighty glad to see those taillights going out of the driveway. So, well, Ben started to dig, and the first day he got down, I don't know, maybe 6 feet or so. And then he came back the next day, and the day after that, and every day he came, he was tired every morning. And the morning he got down about 18, 20 feet the night before. And so then I asked my dad in the morning, I said, today is the day. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, Father Elmer said we'd hit water at 23 feet. Oh yeah, he says, we'll see about that. Anyway, so, all right. So I was kind of disappointed that my dad didn't think that way, but so Ben, he started to dig, and yeah, he took a break before noon, went back to his pickup, and I ate some lunch, and I saw him take a sip or two out of a bottle with a kind of a brown liquid in it, and I assumed it wasn't water. But okay, after lunch he started to dig again, and he gets down 23 feet or so, and he said, well, Max, it's a little easier digging here, he says. He hollered up because my dad was still taking the buckets out, and he said, yeah, he said, it's easier digging now. He says, I even got a little bit of water coming in, he says, believe it or not. And a few minutes later, he brings up a few more buckets, and he hollers down from the bottom of that well. He says, hey, I got water coming in here. And my dad says, what did you say? He says, I got water coming in here. He says, you tell that little Jim up there, he says, to go get my boots out of the truck. And okay, so I go over to the truck and I get his big tall boots and bring them back there. And about the time he says, no, wait a minute, I don't know. He says, I don't need those boots. He says, I got water coming in over my shoes. He says, it's coming in like crazy. And my dad says, he hollered down, he says, what did you say? He says, I got water coming in here. He says, get that ladder back down here. I got to get out of here. And put the ladder back down, and he climbed out there, and you could just see the water coming up in the well. We looked over there, you could see the water just slowly coming up in the well. And my dad, he says, well, he shook his hand. He says, good work, Ben, good work, you know. He said, and Ben said, this is going to be a good well. And he said something about Father Elmer, and my dad says, yeah, it's just luck. And so then, part of the story, Ben, he went back to his truck, and he came back with that bottle of brown liquid that he had been drinking. And my dad wasn't a drinker by any means, but he said, I think we should have a little drink of this, he said, to celebrate. My dad said, well, okay. So he poured a little in a cup that he had, and he says, now how about that little boy there? And my dad took a little bit that whiskey and poured it in a bottle cap, and that was the first whiskey I ever tasted in my life. And to this day, I drink beer, but I don't drink whiskey. But to this day, if I ever have a sip of whiskey, it just comes right back to me that time. But anyway, so I thought after that, a year or so later, I thought maybe it is just luck, you know. But some of our neighbors had dug wells, and they couldn't find water, and they had Father Elmer out again, and he told them where to dig, and they got good wells. So I asked my dad. I was too young to drive at the time, of course, but every farm kid knows how to drive everything. And I asked my dad if I could take the old truck out and go to one of those neighbors and take a look at those wells they had just dug. And he said, yeah, he says, but you'll be back before dark here. So I said, okay. So I got that old truck and drove over to one of the neighbors, and they had the two wells there, and they had planks over one, and I pulled the planks aside. There was no water in that, and then the other one they still had planks over the side because they hadn't filled the other one back in. And I looked down that well, and the water was almost to the top of the ground. And those wells, they weren't very far from each other. So I thought, man, there's got to be something to this dowsing stuff. So after a period of time, other neighbors dug wells and they had the same experience with that Father Elmer. And so one night I decided, or one afternoon, my dad let me use the old truck again. I cut myself a willow branch, just like Father Elmer had done, and I held it like he did, and I walked around those wells and stuff, and I thought, boy, that branch is just going to drop to the ground just like it did for Father Elmer. And I walked around those wells and nothing happened. Nothing. And I thought, I just was bummed. I was devastated. I thought, well, maybe there's nothing to this after all. So I had another chance to go to another neighbor's some weeks later under the same conditions. They had a dry well, and then Father Elmer came out and had a good well. And Father Elmer, he had evidently dropped his willow branch not too far away, and anyway, so and he had already marked the place on the ground where the water flow supposedly traveled, and the good well was dug right on that row of flags, or the row of markings. So I took that willow branch, and I walked across that path, and nothing happened. So I thought, what the heck? I thought, okay, I said to myself, there was nobody around, I thought. And I said it out loud, okay, God, if there's anything to this water dowsing, show me. And so I closed my eyes, I walked across that flow, and I had my eyes closed, and somebody snuck up behind me and pushed down on the front of that willow branch. Opened my eyes, what am I going to say, I looked around and I was all alone. I took that willow branch and I flung that thing. I got back in that old truck and I drove home. And boy, I had a hard time getting to sleep that night because it was just unbelievable what happened to me. And that's kind of how I became interested and how I got started doing this. And every now and then somebody would catch me trying to see if I could find something between the good well and the bad well, and it was in disbelief at the time. But what happened? I got older and served some time in the Navy. I was an aviation electronics technician, and I was assigned to an elite helicopter and a submarine squadron aboard the USS Valley Forge. Anyway, I got out and I worked for the RCA service company out of Camden, New Jersey for a while, and then I took a job with an international investigation agency for a time. And coming home on one of the weekends, I met my wife, who was going to a local college, and I thought, gee, if I'm going to change my lifestyle and maybe settle down and get married someday, I better change my lifestyle and do something different. So ended up married this girl. We've been married ever since. We have 6 daughters, but at any rate, shortly after we were married, my mother called me one evening, one afternoon, and she said, Jim, she said, we have a relative. She said, they're building a new home and they just drilled a dry hole on the property, 420 feet deep. And she said they have no water and they've got the home being built. And she says they called me and she said, I told them that you're going to come out and help them. You're going to go find a water supply for them. And I said, no way, Mom. No way am I going to do this. I said, I'm not going to tell somebody where to spend their money. I said, and then have them, it wouldn't work out or something like that. And she said, oh, yes, you are. She said, I promised them you would come. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it, Mom. She says, I gave them your phone number, she says, and you are going to call them. And I said, no, I don't think so. And so I hung up. A short while later, my mother called me back, and she said, Jim, did you call him? And Carol had overheard the one side of the conversation at the time. And she says, Jim, what was that all about with your mother? And you said, no way are you going to help somebody. And I told her what my mother asked me to do. And Carol knew at the time that I probably had some ability for doing some other strange things. But at any rate, I did call the people, and I came out there, and the drilling rig was still standing over the dry hole because it was the weekend. And I walked all over their property, and I could only find one line of flow or reaction zone or whatever it was that I seemed to get a different kind of a dowsing reaction over. And I told the guy, I said, "Hey, I don't know what to tell you." I said, I don't know. I said, I sense something here. I said, I don't know what it is, but I said, that's the only thing I can sense on your property. And he said, well, you got it marked out here. And so I told him, I said, that's all I can tell you. I said, you've got a 420-foot dry hole here. And he said, if we drill over there, he said, that driller's not going to drill there. I said, you're probably right. I said, if I were the driller, I probably wouldn't drill there myself. And he said, I'll have to think it over the weekend. So, all right. Monday morning comes, and the driller comes out there, and he said, well, we're going to go on down. Going to drill some more. He said, no. He said, I don't think so. I don't want to drill any deeper here. And the driller said, well, you got the house going up here. You got to have a water supply. And he said, yeah. He says, I'm going to drill a different place. He said, well, where might that be? And he says, right over there. And it must have been less than 20 feet away from that 420-foot dry hole. And the driller said, no way in hell am I going to drill over there. He said, we got a hole here this deep. He says, you think I'm going to drill over there? And he said, well, he says, I had that Kuebelbeck kid over here, he said, over the weekend, and he told me that he thought he found something there. And he said, that's a waste of time and money. He says, we're not going to do that. And he said, well, that's what I told Kuebelbeck. And Kuebelbeck said, well, if he doesn't want to drill there, and you don't want to drill any deeper here, I should get a different driller. Whoa, he says, all right, he says, you want to waste your money? We'll move the drilling rig. Okay, so they moved the drilling rig. He had two of his boys with him. And he said, I'm going home. I got other work to do. He says, you guys go ahead. He said, but it's a waste of time and money here. So he left. And a couple of the neighbors next door neighbors had known what was going on there. And they came over to watch for a while. And all of a sudden, water just shot out of the ground. And the boys, they shut the drilling rig down. And the neighbors asked, what happened? They said, we must have blown a water hose up on top of the drilling rig. So they climbed up on top and looked for a break in the hose on the drilling rig, because water from a drilling rig is forced down the hole as they drilled, and that forces the mud and stuff, the cuttings, up into the mud box on top. So they looked all over. They couldn't find a break in it. So they started up the drilling rig again, and water just shot out of the ground. And air and water was blowing it out. So they got on a truck radio and they called their dad. And they said, Dad, we got a situation here. And the guy said, what'd you do? Did you break down? No, they said, we think we run into some water. Well, he says, hold everything. I'll be right out there. He says, it'll take me a while. I'll be back. So they waited until he got back, and they started up the drilling rig again, and water just shot out of the hole. Anyway, so they got a good well there. It was about 50 feet deep. It was 40 feet deep. They got 50 gallons a minute right next to that dry hole. And if my arms would have been twice as long, I could have reached both well casings. So that's how I first got started doing this. Have you ever played bingo?
Sorry?
Have you ever played the game of bingo?
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Where they have a the last name is a blackout game where you play all the numbers,
Yeah.
okay, and you have one number left.
It's the Dowser.
Okay, no, it kind of an apprehensive feeling.
Yes.
That is the
Okay.
closest I can describe it.
Okay.
Um,
We're gonna speak about. We're gonna talk about this.
okay.
James. So, for example, I want to ask you, what do you feel when you're near to a water source? There's a first question, and the second question is, to be a dozer involves mental abilities. What do you feel when you're close to a water source?
Okay, first of all, I can walk around all day and never sense an underground water source until I concentrate on it. And the only explanation I can come up with is that it's a combination of the physical, I don't want to say psychic, because that word scares people, okay? Mental, a combination between physical and mental. I believe that's what the combination is. And something, it's kind of a mental thing. When something causes a neuromuscular reaction in my body, that would probably cause a dowsing rod to react. But I've been doing this so many years now, I can sense when it would happen. So then I mark on the ground where I sense this, and then I make a circle and try to see if there's a directional flow toward that. But I've been doing this so many years now that my wife Carol works with me all the time. If we go a great distance.
Carol?
Carol.
She's a dozer too.
Well, yes, but she lets me lose the sleep at night. Okay. So, when you tell somebody where to spend their money. But I've been doing this so many years, I can sense where it would happen. So a lot of times Carol will say, Jim, let the rod go down. People want to see something happen, physical, because that's part of our human nature. If it is an unexplainable thing, okay, but if you can see something physically happen, it's more evidential or whatever. But that's just showmanship. A person doesn't have to do that. Years ago, I used to hear some of these dowsers, they'd say, oh, the reaction is so strong, it twists the bark off of the willow branch or whatever. That was just showmanship. But I never use a willow branch anymore, never. Never. In fact, after those early experiences I had, I thought, to make this look more professional, if indeed I can do this, I make my own dowsing rod. I can show you later what it looks like. It's just two rods tied together with a wire nut on the end. It's just, but it looks a little more professional than me coming to somebody's property and cut a branch off a tree. Okay, even I think that's a little kooky. Okay, so I decided if I can make a device of my own that would look a little bit more professional in the eyes of the landowner, I would do that. And so I devised my own and have been using that method ever since. But what I do when I come to a piece of property, I try to delineate the flow. We have marking flags. I try to delineate the flow first. And then, for some reason, I'm able to sense an outside edge of the flow on both sides of the flow, okay? And we follow these flows far enough, and where that reaction zone widens out, to me anyway, that indicates that the water-bearing formation, the vein, is getting thicker. And that's where we would mark it. It's the same water, the same flow, but you'd be able to get more water if the vein is thicker and you can put in more well screen. It's just something I kind of guessed or stumbled on over the years, and it's a method I use. We've done over 3,000 of these, and initially we only took last resort jobs because I wasn't sure I could consistently do this first of all, I thought it was unbelievable, and that's how I got into this, trying to discredit it in the first place. But that's what I've been doing ever since. And we only took last resort jobs at first. And then when we were able to find water where the well drillers and the geologists couldn't, it lent a little bit of credibility to what we were trying to do. Because it took me a long time to convince myself that I was actually be able to do that consistently. And when you tell somebody else where to spend their money, I don't want to make any enemies. So that's what we've been doing. And it's very satisfying work. We get to meet a lot of nice people. Some of the geologists and hydrogeologists, they're taught, or they have the belief that water dowsing is nonsense. And in some ways I can't fault them for that, because even in our area, you can go up and down some of these country roads, and everybody and their mother-in-law and their uncle is a water finder, if you just ask them. Only they've discovered that they can get a dowsing reaction of some sort, but it doesn't indicate underground water. And a lot of people, I'm sure even around the world, they've seen people take L-shaped wires, a short L and a longer L-shaped wires, and they hold them in their hand and they walk across the earth, and for some reason those wires will maybe cross or react over certain places. And what the people don't realize, somebody's grandmother tells them, oh, when that happens, you're a water finder. Maybe not. But what most of those people who can do that, and that's even amazing in a way of human ability, but they can find underground water lines, sewer lines, electrical lines, telephone lines, buried building foundations and whatever. What they're sensing where the earth was disturbed from its natural state. Okay? Some people can go to a cemetery where there's very few grave markers, and for some reason, with those angle rods, I call them, those angle rods for some reason will react over every grave. Okay, so somebody says, ooh, you're finding bodies. The object happens to be there, but they're sensing where the earth was disturbed from its natural state. They're not necessarily water finders. So they go out, somebody needs a well, they go out and those wires cross or whatever, and they say, drill here. The driller drills there and he gets a great well. What they don't realize is that driller could have drilled anywhere in that part of the country and gotten water. So they go home and they drink a beer and say, I'm one of those water finders. Then they go out another time or two and they get a dry hole. Well, then they say, oh, that driller went through the water. No, there was no water there. So that brings discredit upon the dowsing ability to many, many people. And in some ways you can't fault them for that. If these people fail time after time, I wouldn't lend any credibility to that human ability either.
So, James, when you was young,
yes,
you was just about to be discouraged about to be a dozer?
Yes.
Because the people, normal people say, oh, he's a dozer and he doesn't give you not much credibility after they saw your work.
There's no truth to that.
So, be a dozer, James. It's to have a mental capability to receive this disturb of the natural condition of a piece of land, for example.
Some connection.
Yeah.
Some connection.
Yeah, so to have some connection with nature. Okay, because that's one of the questions I want to talk about. What do you think about this technological world where we're living now at this moment?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we are losing this ancestral connection to the nature with all these technological gadgets?
Yes, we're going in a different direction. Even like just say, for instance, when this country was first settled, the the Native Americans, the Indians, they were much more connected to nature than any of us. We've been, what would you say, we've been downgraded and didn't realize it. They had a connection to the world. They had their gods, they had the sun, they had the great chiefs, they had nature, and we've lost most of that along the way, I think.
So, James, do you think the people right now are asleep in our society?
Definitely, definitely. They wake up in the morning, they eat, they sleep, they go to work, they come home, they go sleep. Same day after day after day, without realizing what many things there are in the world. Some people, they go to their graves and never discover their hidden abilities. It's too bad.
So that means we have lost our ability to connect with nature.
Yes, definitely.
And why people are not able right now to develop their mental abilities? Why? About the technology, about the stress, about the life, about the way we are living. What do you think about?
Well, human nature being what it is, a lot of people don't make an effort to discover many things around them in the natural world, and there's much more going on than people interacting with each other. There's much more going on that people don't realize. There are so many unexplainable things that have yet to be discovered. It's just it's kind of sad that people don't make more of an effort to relate to the natural world. I mean, why are we here? What are we doing? Who put us here? What's going on? There has to be a reason for things in our life. I think we were all, as different as it sounds, we were all put here on Earth for a reason. There's a reason we're here. A lot of people never even think of that. I think we've all been given particular different talents and abilities and things. Some people never bother to discover that. It's kind of sad.
So, do you think people right now, some people are living like zombies?
Definitely.
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 James, we don't accept the things which are unexplained. Why?
Human nature. Human nature. That'd be the only answer I could give you to that. If you can't explain something in our way of thinking, and much of it is how we've been taught from young on. A lot of times, unexplainable things. Let's not even look at them. It's easier not to, and many people go through life with that attitude without realizing they have the attitude. Human nature kind of likes underground water. It takes the path of least resistance. Okay, and speaking of that, I think it's these paths of least resistance that I, as a water dowser, am able to discover. I can sense these paths, and sometimes I wonder if indeed those paths are what I think they are, and I'm just being led to the place where there is a water source. I don't have all the answers yet, and I'll probably get them someday, but I'm not ready for that yet, because that's on the other side of our natural life, I think.
How many sources, water sources, did you found in all your whole life?
Well, I'd have to double up the ones we've done, because we always try to find two good choices on a piece of property. We've
4,000.
6,000.
6,000 sources. Water
Right.
sources. Incredible.
I'm counting those. I'm counting the ones we always pick in case they run into some rocks or whatever. So, and even nowadays, even if they run into granite formations or rocks, the modern well drilling rigs can drill through them. But we always tell the people, if you run into solid granite formation, shut it down and go to our second choice before you even think about drilling granite, because that's very expensive.
So, we was talking about the connection with nature, but right now a lot of people lost this connection. But it's possible to recover this connection with nature in the world we are living right now.
If people would even make the effort, it would be possible to reconnect. But it's easier not to. Just get up in the morning, do your regular things, go to bed at night, get up in the morning, do your regular things. People are lazy. or just don't have the curiosity to discover things around them.
Why, for example, will be a good start to reconnect with nature? Simply, I imagine, for example, having a walk, because you say people are lazy. Yeah, for sure. They prefer to stay in front of the TV with the popcorn and all this.
Yes.
I think one good way is moving and going directly to the nature, but what you have to do in the nature to reconnect with the nature?
My best answer would be to ask yourself, why am I here? That would be my best answer. Why am I here? Who or what creator, why am I here? Why is everything else here? There has to be a reason. There has to be a reason.